go for it.
Good one. Well, listen, on behalf of K Club, Neil, thanks so much for, I was going to say giving up your time, but I think we've all got a little bit more time on our hands. And I'm very conscious that you came and gave a fascinating talk to the members of K Club. And I think people were riveted to hear, I personally, the whole preparation that goes in. And I think the moment you were saying where you do the sort of counting down from 5 to the crack of the, you know, the off was absolutely fascinating. And I know now that you're looking at how you can transfer some of the skills that you've developed. But I wondered, going back, if you go back almost to your childhood, if you could perhaps tell us a little bit about, you know, maybe where you're, because you've obviously got to be ultra competitive to compete at your level. Where do you think your competitive streak came from? And was it perhaps having to overcome a disability at a, you know, very early age?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt I'm a competitive person, and you know, it's very evident to see from the line of work I chose in racing bikes. And you know, it's something that's always been within me from a very young age. You know, I was one of those kids who just loved being out and about in the fresh air, you know, doing sport. So I think it was often a case that my parents found it a good way to get me to burn off some of my endless energy when I was young. But yeah, there's definitely an element. I mean, I was diagnosed with my eye condition at the age of 4. And although, because it's a degenerative condition, it didn't affect me greatly in my early years. As I kind of went through school, it started to affect kind of my work and things a lot more. So I did get to that point where I'm just about from that generation where disability used to be something that you tried to hide away, perhaps more than being something you embrace. And so I was often being kind of told, you know, to keep it hidden, and perhaps there were certain things I wouldn't be able to do because I was disabled, which to me was an absolute no-go. That, you know, I had to find a way to be competitive, and I think a lot of it has come from that, a chip on the shoulder perhaps, but it's that kind of prove people wrong attitude, which can be very fruitful at certain occasions. And
were you from a very sporty family?
Not particularly. My dad used to play a bit of football, but not very sporty at all, actually. It was I was kind of the first real member of the family to very much get involved in sport, and I'm not really sure why that came about. I mean, again, I think I just had a lot of energy, and I tried a lot of sports when I was young, but I found athletics at the age of 10, and that kind of freedom of just going as fast as you can, the simplicity of it was hugely groundbreaking to me, and I just fell in love with that I could just be myself and you know, just express myself by running as fast as I can. And sure, if I beat a few people along the way, then great.
And of course, your career, I mean, we'll move on to this, your illustrious sort of career started actually in athletics, didn't it?
Yeah, that's it. I was it was the sport I found at the age of 10, and I was in it till my mid-20s actually. And you know, it was very much a hobby for me for a long time, a hobby that I took very serious. So I'd train 5 times a week throughout my teenage years pretty much, but I was never overly competitive, to be honest. And for many of those years, when kind of the whole puberty hit and didn't quite happen for me at an early age, I actually finished last in almost every race I did, as everyone else got bigger and stronger and I just didn't. So it was very much a fun factor. The social side of it I loved, and it wasn't until my early 20s when my eyesight started to get a bit worse, and someone mentioned to me that the Paralympics might be an option, and I'd never considered it at all at that point. But I went and had the sort of test done to see where I would kind of fare on the scale, and it turned out I could be competing at a Paralympic level, and that was an opportunity then to take it more serious. And that eventually culminated in me making it to the Beijing Paralympics in 2008, which at the time, of course, was this huge thing for me, that to go from a club athlete who had this hobby to suddenly a full-time athlete and then become a Paralympian was this kind of skyrocket effect, which was remarkable, and was when I fell in love with the Paralympic Games.
And I'm interested as well. I mean, we can talk about the many, you know, gold medals you've won and some of the ups and downs in a little bit. But what was it like also being thrown into the limelight? Because suddenly, you know, the whole Paralympic movement took off, and people who perhaps normally we wouldn't have known about, like yourself, are suddenly thrown into sort of media spotlight. How was that? Because obviously they're asking you all sorts of questions, and probably some of them quite personal, that you wouldn't be used to. You know, how comfortable did you feel about that whole sort of limelight side?
It was definitely interesting. I can remember my first race that was on television quite vividly, and I get nervous before races, of course. Always do, is that excitement factor, and I still do to this day, always, regardless of the level of race, But something about knowing it was going to be on TV that first time and walking to the start line and just feeling physically sick, knowing that you're actually, people are watching now. This isn't just a hobby you do at the weekend. People actually can see if you fail, if you muck up. So it was quite a big jump in kind of the way I dealt with it, but it was also a fun factor to be part of Paralympic sport at that time. It had started to grow from kind of Sydney onwards in 2000, but I still don't think it was very big. In 2008, I think there was a big shift. I mean, obviously, we got into London 2012, and it was huge in the UK, and everyone fell in love with the Paralympics. But there was already something happening back in 2008, and people were aware of a few select Paralympians. Particularly, I mean, we had a few in the UK, but also the Oscar Pistorius was happening, and obviously that story didn't end particularly well. But at the time, he was this huge superstar globally that everyone knew about, and I happened to bump into him in the Paralympic Village, and you kind of suddenly a bit starstruck yourself. But yeah, it was a great time to be involved in Paralympic sport, and starting to get that recognition and getting disability out there in the public eye was good. And I started to embrace my own disability, which is something I hadn't done in my younger years.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. It's a fact people perhaps don't know. Obviously, you and Laura are both ambassadors for Seashell, but you may not know this, that Oscar Pistorius did actually visit Seashell at the height of his fame, if you like. He was sponsored by BT as one of their sponsored athletes, and came. And I mean, I won't comment on the day. He was charm itself, and it was an amazing experience for our young people. And he, like yourself, when you visited, was very at ease with our students. But so moving on to you had enormous success, and obviously world champion as well. And I want to move on with the idea of your moving on to your business career. You've obviously chosen now. You've still got your sights set high on achieving in terms of the Paralympics. But you've come up with this new concept for business coaching. As I say, you had the room sort of in raptures when you were speaking, and there was a lot of resonance with businesses. And I wonder if you could tell us. I know, I'm passionate about cycling myself, but the whole idea of the name of your book and the business coaching program. Could you tell us how that came about? Maybe a little bit about your move away from cycling, I suppose, looking at your career longer term, and actually how you came about with the concept and particularly the name.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole principles obviously have been something I've been learning throughout my cycling career. So these are insights I've picked up from over a decade of competing. But it wasn't really until probably around 2016 when I started to put things together. And the reason that came about, I mean, initially when you take up sport, you're so focused on sport and it's your be all and end all. I mean, you feel like you need to dedicate everything in order to succeed. So I didn't really think long term at all for much of my sporting career. And it wasn't until 2016 at the Rio Paralympic Games where I went in as an immense favourite to win. I'd gone undefeated in competition for 4 years up until that point since the London Games. So I was a huge favourite to win gold. And on that day, I performed as well as could be expected, but someone else performed even better. And I came away with a silver medal, which sounds like an incredible achievement. I'm well aware, silver medal at a games. But for me at that point, this was a complete and utter failure. It was just devastating that I had gone in there expecting to win gold, and I felt the pressure of having a nation expecting as well, which, in reality, I'm sure that isn't the way, but you feel like you've got that whole expectation of a nation on you, your teammates. I ride on a tandem. The person I'm riding with, Pete Mitchell, at that point in time, felt like I'd let everyone down. And it was something that took a long time to pick myself up from. And I started to wonder at that point if it was kind of the beginning of the end of my sporting career, that, I was in my early to mid 30s at that stage. And often you're starting to get those questions already at that age of, when are you thinking about the retirement? Sporting careers don't tend to last that long. So I started to wonder, maybe this was, just performance starting to dwindle because of my age, and there's nothing I could do about it. And I kind of realized at that point I had no other source of income at all. And to be honest, I didn't have any idea who I really was outside of sport, because I dedicated everything to this life of cycling success, and it had been worthwhile, of course, but yeah, suddenly, I had nothing. So I just kind of started doing a lot of exploration, a lot of reading, trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my life. And a few books I read kind of.
Just one, sorry to interrupt you. Do you get a lot of support from the Paralympic movement? So are they, helping you prepare for your career beyond Paralympics, or was it you're a little bit on your own?
I mean, there was sort of a transition happening around that time where initially there wasn't a lot of support really for future development. The expectation was you would dedicate 100% to your sport, but that was just starting to change around that time. Obviously, there's been a lot of controversies around not just British cycling, but other sports in recent years where, athletes perhaps haven't been treated as well as they could be. So there was some change happening, but so I did get a bit of support, but I did feel quite on my own, to be honest. You don't want to be the person who comes forward and says, I'm thinking about my career in the future, particularly at a time when you've just lost a race, because the worry is then everyone else will think that maybe it's the end of your time, and that's the last thing I wanted. So I eventually just got to a point where I was reflecting on my career and realized that, although I dedicated all this time to cycling and I felt like I had nothing to show for it elsewhere, I realized that actually I'd picked up a lot of information, a lot of tools and tricks that I'd had to utilize to get to number one in the world and stay there for so many years. And it was just a case of kind of putting these things down on paper and starting to make sense of it all, of what I actually had to offer. And I realized there was actually a lot with regards to performance, how I go about planning, setting goals, achieving goals, and most importantly, the kind of mindset around competing at an elite level with a huge amount of pressure on you on one given moment to perform. And sort of at that point, Earn Your Stripes was born. Not in its name at that point, but I realized that this was something I quite enjoyed doing, was kind of sharing my knowledge with others. But I felt like it needed a name, and one of the things from, as you well know, Dominic, from cycling, when you become a world champion, you get a rainbow jersey.
I haven't become a world champion yet, but matter of time.
There's still time. Yeah, there's still time. Don't give up hope yet. And so you get this jersey. It's got 5 different colored stripes across it, the same colors as the Olympic rings, actually, to kind of signify all the continents of the world. And when you're a world champion, your expectation is that you wear this jersey whenever you're competing for the next year until the next championships happen. So you win this rainbow jersey, which is known as the Rainbow Stripes. And I realized that I'd been saying this phrase to myself for many years to kind of motivate myself to become a world champion each year. When I was struggling in training, I'd say, come on, you got to earn your stripes. This is a saying that's synonymous with making steps in the world, moving forwards. And I realized I had this saying in front of me, and it was so fitting for what I would be doing, that Earn Your Stripes kind of was born from that. And now apply it to business as well, because I feel like it's something that, the similarities between sport and business are so obvious and vast, that it's this highly competitive world where everyone's trying to get an edge, but you're still friendly competitor with everyone else, and you can learn from everyone, but you always want to be that person who's just in front of the crowd, and so much pressure on performance as well, and particularly working with a team. So I felt like there's so many crossovers, and that's why I wanted to do this and essentially continue that world of excitement and competition on beyond my cycling career.
And you've taken the theme of the 5 stripes. There are 5 now strands to the sort of coaching, if I can call it a coaching program, that you've put together. Perhaps you could tell us about the 5 elements that now comprise your program.
Yeah, so in order to be a world champion, you have to defeat competitors from all 5 of these continents. And I also think to be world leading in whatever you do, you need to excel in these 5 areas. And they're the first one is drive, and that's kind of finding your motivation, because we all know without having that kind of something to push you forward, you're never going to achieve anything. So it's how you go about finding that motivation and utilizing it day in, day out. Then we look at performance, which is kind of that day-to-day goal setting, goal getting, how you strategize, and set out the long-term plan, which for me often is this 4-year cycle. At the beginning of every 4 years, I plan to win Paralympic gold, and I sit down with my team and I set a time that I think will be necessary in order to win that gold medal. And then it's this hugely daunting goal. And it's this process of how you break that down into what do I need to do day in, day out over a 4-year cycle in order to get to that one point. Then we look, which I've already mentioned, the team is, I compete in a fairly individual sport. I ride on a bike with one other person, but cycling can be quite a lonely sport. But the reality is, at British Cycling, I have a huge team of experts around me who all have their specialities. So you've got your coaches, physios, nutritionists, physiologists, performance analysts, and the list goes on and on and on. There's so many people involved in delivering my performance, and they're kind of putting their level of expertise, and I'm utilizing that. So it's how you kind of create that team around you to really maximize performance. And then I've alluded to already that the mindset, which is so important, that you have this strategy in place, but motivation is something I find that, it changes day in, day out. It goes up and down, it fluctuates. And it's having that mindset of an elite athlete where regardless of how motivated you are, you have to deliver every single day, and you have to find a way to do that. So it's creating those tools within your mind to encourage yourself to step up and make that performance that, sacrifice, put yourself on the line each day.
Particularly, I mean, one of the things you talked about was your own personal disappointment, after the highs of London, and, the highs and lows, which obviously resonate with business. Presumably, that whole mindset is when you've had a major setback, which everybody does have in business. And from a fundraising point of view, there are times where we think we've got a major donation in the bag and it doesn't happen. How is it, before we move on to the final part, the fifth strand, how has that helped you sort of overcoming those major, bad times that you've had in your career, as we all have had?
Yeah. And, it's easy to say it when you look retrospectively, but all those bad times generally have been incredible lessons that have I've learned things that have taken me on a step further going forward. But obviously when you're in it at the time, you don't see that. So, there are a number of tools I've used over the years, and having that drive, which I mentioned at the start, is initially the thing of that reminding yourself of the bigger picture, the bigger goal that you're aiming for, and having some sort of tool in order to remind yourself. So I often use self-talk, which is used widely in sport, and we all use it, the sort of inner monologue that you have that goes on.
Like a mantra almost.
Yes, so particularly the mantra. And there are various types of self-talk you can use, whether it's, for different situations. You can use calming self-talk, negative self-talk, which is obviously what spirals and usually in these situations takes over, and it's finding ways to flick over to something else. So using motivational self-talk, whether it be positive or negative, and having, in particular, as you mentioned, the mantra, which is something I use a lot, a saying that you say regularly that has some real meaning to you, that when you say it, flicks your focus back to why you're doing this, and that realization that the defeats are part of the journey. And I also find that it's something I do with my team, that debriefing after an event, whether it be win or lose, is hugely beneficial. That getting the emotions out there, talking about it, and what happened, and getting that perspective of others as well as to what happened and what could be learned going forwards is really important. So, a mistake I made after losing in 2016 was I didn't debrief, I didn't talk about it, and I realize that now that just built inside of me this feeling of absolute failure, like I'd let my nation down, when if I'd probably spoken with more people about it, I'd have got that perspective much sooner and would have been able to carry on. So
we have a system actually at Seashell Trust where we have because it can be very high intensity working with some very complex children, where we actually have a system of a sort of hot debrief where you can straight away get the emotions of the situation out, and then you have a period of reflection, and then you come back and have a cold debrief with a trained member of staff, and that can be very, very effective. And I interrupted you. We're going to go on to the fifth stripe, the perform under pressure.
Yeah, so this is it's very much the fact that if you want to be a world leader, that performing day in, day out is great, but obviously you come to these real high pressure situations. For me, it's a race day where you absolutely have to perform. And in business, that could be anything from, some form of presentation or a sales pitch that you need to do. It could be a meeting with someone, you know, anything, or those big days when you're closing a project or a deal, you know, these big occasions where you have to perform. And what I realized that over the years, I've developed this ability where initially I'd perform kind of on par with my normal performance when I was competing. But I've developed this ability to now step up my performance when I'm under huge pressure. So it's using the pressure to your advantage. And that's taken a lot of kind of learning the process involved, that, you know, it's no surprise that world records generally get broken on the big occasions at Olympics, Paralympics, World Championships. And the reason are the world leaders know how to use that pressure, the adrenaline, to their advantage. So it's having these tools in place that you find that's something extra. And that's something I've always prided myself in my career that I can do, is step up and deliver when I need to.
Yeah. And I think, excuse me, so much of this will resonate amongst people watching this from the you know, from a business perspective. And in terms of what you were offering, you've got 3 different levels of support for those people who are listening to this, who might hopefully afterwards want to contact you for a chat. And perhaps can you tell what the sort of different levels are that you're able to offer companies?
Yeah, well, something I've always enjoyed doing is those kind of talks going into companies and just outlining one of the areas that I've kind of highlighted there, and, you know, putting some story from my career. I've got plenty of stories now from well over a decade of highs and lows that I can put into practice. But, you know, working with a team, and that could be any size, of sharing my knowledge, some of the tools that I use that can be implemented with ease, to be honest, particularly those things around mindset that are things that, you know, just by doing a bit of repetition yourself, you can use them and get benefit. So whether I go in and speak to a group of people, or a Q&A system, that's kind of the basic sort of thing I offer. And then kind of step up is doing workshops over a series, working through all 5 of these stripes, where, you know, I'll take a team from who are generally high performing and find a way to find that little bit extra. And that's kind of the key within sport, that we've always found, that getting to an international level and competing is great, but then everyone's there, it's finding that extra little something. And that's something I look to delve into, using all these sort of tools and techniques of how you can find that extra little bit of performance. So that's something I like to run over maybe, you know, a 6-month process where I'll go in for 6 sessions, whatever, once a month, and work with a team and be in contact. And that excites me because that's seeing real progress happening as well. And again, I want to be at that cutting edge. I find that exciting. And then, of course, I'm always keen to work with people one-to-one as well, of kind of really delving deep down into what makes them tick as an individual and how to get the most out of them. Yeah, it's just, again, that's something I've realized, working with a team over the years and my training partners, it's something I've always enjoyed being part of that. And yeah, I think I found another world where I can share that excitement and be part of it and alongside a team.
Absolutely. Well, I know K Club will have all the details of how people, you know, can contact you, and I would encourage everybody to do that. On a slightly lighter note, many businesses, when they start up, will have started as sort of husband and wife alliances, and not everybody will know that your wife Laura is also a very accomplished Paralympic cyclist. And what's it like having 2 highly competitive people living under one roof, especially at the moment during COVID?
Yeah, it's got its ups and downs, let's be honest. I mean, for the most part, it's great having 2 competitive people, particularly just now. I think it'd be very easy in these sort of situations to let the enthusiasm drift, and, you know, once you miss a session or 2, it's very easy then just to slip back into this world of just ticking by, which I have no opportunity to do whatsoever, because Laura's always there beside me on the bike. We've got a training room with 2 bikes set up on static trainers, and I've started doing a lot more. She's an endurance athlete, and doing much more of the endurance training alongside her, and realizing how good she actually is. There's a reason she's a 3-time world champion, it turns out. She can put me to shame. So yeah, that competitive spirit really does help. It pushes me, but of course, I don't like losing either, and neither does she. So, but someone always has to, unfortunately. So, occasional argument, of course, but I think for the most part, it's been hugely beneficial. And having someone who understands the kind of the ups and downs as well,
Yeah.
of elite sport, that, you know, going into competitions and things, we're both highly stressed at that time, and
Yeah.
you know, we get on each other's backs a bit, but we both know why. So it's that understanding that, oh, if we have a few little arguments or whatever, that's why, and we can kind of put that behind us, and there is that understanding. So yeah, I mean, it's great.
And how are you? You know, what are your feelings? Obviously, the Olympics and the Paralympics has now been delayed, and you will have been working incredibly hard towards that. How, you know, are you dealing with the frustration of that? What motivates you? I suppose you've talked about, you know, you have this great self-motivation, but how are you sort of coping with that? Because that must have been a massive disappointment. We're all in the same boat, but how are you coping with that disappointment?
Yeah, I mean, ever since the day I lost back in 2016 in Rio, my sights were set on winning the title back. Once I kind of got over that initial disappointment and my cycling career got back on track, then winning back my gold in Tokyo was always the aim. So, you know, I've been world champion now for a couple of years again. I've got back to top of the world, and everything was perfectly aligned for this summer to be going to Tokyo as current world champion, number one in that event, and almost at the place where, you know, F1 had to catch me, so I was in the prime seat there. And 4 years ago taught me that nothing's guaranteed, of course, but you know, I'm exactly where I wanted to be. So to see it being postponed was hugely disappointing. Um, you know, at the minute we're talking another year in advance, and that's fine. I mean, a year is not a huge amount of time, but obviously a lot can change in any world, in sport particularly. It's very fast moving. So whether I'll still be on top of the world by then, who knows? I mean, there's no secret. The years are ticking by, and you know, I am getting closer and closer to the end of my career, but I'm still confident being at the top of the game that one more year I can stay there for sure. And my target's still very much set on winning that title back. Now, the interesting thing is there's no guarantee that next year happens either, and that's going to be a whole different bridge to cross if that's the case. But at this point, we very much set our sights on that. A quick bit of going back to talking about debriefing, where we re-strategized, and the plan at this stage, if we were competing this summer, my training would look incredibly different to what it now does. So it's kind of rejigging the plan, changing things. So I've got going from having 4 months at the time to 16 months to be ready for that one day, that one race. Obviously, the outlook's very different currently, but
But
yeah, I'm confident.
you know, they're all things that resonate with business. You know, from a Seashell's point of view, some people will have heard we've just had our planning application approved, so we're all ready to go with the May the fundraising campaign. It couldn't have struck at a worse time, because people are focusing on COVID and not, you know, supporting major capital campaigns. So we again are having to re-strategize and look at a slightly longer term scale, and businesses will be the same, I'm sure. One final question I have: as I mentioned, I enjoy a bit of cycling, and there are, you know, there will definitely be winners and losers from a business point of view coming through COVID. I think one of the biggest winners is going to be Zwift. And when I go on, I mean, I've been outside most of it, but on the days where it's raining and I go indoors, the number of people I see online, you know, regularly 10, 15,000 people. It used to be 6, it's now 15,000 people cycling. And I actually went along on one of the rides that Laura led on Zwift. What do you think for the future holds for virtual competitive cycling? Because I've noticed a lot of teams now are setting up competitive rides, and you know, with the Tour de France, the Giro, etc., coming up. What do you think the future holds for those sort of virtual competitive rides?
Yeah, you're right, and it's affecting all businesses. But yeah, particularly with cycling. I mean, like yourself, I was training on Zwift, which is an online training platform. You can do from your house this virtual world. You can all go and race, and I've been using it for a couple of years now. And then the day that lockdown happened, suddenly the numbers just exploded, and it's, you know, the servers were taking a hit, and every event I entered, you'd have thousands of people in, and it's just incredible to see. But yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, technology now is moving forward to a point. I mean, I compete on a Paralympic level on a tandem because I can't see where I'm going on a bike. On a static bike in a world where it's safe for me to ride on Zwift online, then suddenly it opens a door. Well, could we be doing Paralympic racing here where I don't need a pilot anymore? You know, there's a lot of questions to be asked. And as you say, a lot of professional teams are on there. It's a lot more accessible for a lot of people as well. So
And it opens it up for cyclists amateur cyclists like me who can actually go and cycle as I did with Laura, or you can cycle with, Team Ineos or British Cycling, the Team GB cyclists as well. So it actually opens it up, not just as a spectator sport, but actually for competing.
This is it, and it's hugely accessible. And yeah, I'm fed up with the amount of amateur riders, supposed amateur riders, that come along and put me to shame when I'm supposed to be doing a nice, easy recovery ride, and people are flying past me, and I feel I have to keep up with them. So it's a dangerous world out there. But yeah, it's really exciting to see, and it's happening in lots of industries where this. How can we actually be incredibly well linked, despite the fact we're all locked down and at this distance? I mean, there's so many businesses have exploded in the past few weeks. It'll be really interesting to see how things move forwards. I certainly think there's now a place for e-racing. I've no doubt we'll go back to the old style of road races being on and being very popular, but it's definitely opening a door, and I'm intrigued to see what it will mean for the future for us in parasport as well, because it does make things more accessible.
Yeah. And of course, from your own business point of view, there's the opportunity, as we are having to social distance, that if there is anybody who wants to, have an initial consultation with you via a Zoom meeting, that opens up all sorts of opportunities.
Yeah, and the other exciting thing is that I've just by pure coincidence had a book that I've been writing for the past 2 years is just coming out, and actually I think I've got this wasn't planned, but I do just happen to have a copy by my side here. So yeah, so I've got a book coming out in the beginning of June, 3rd of June, which outlines all the areas I said and outlines all my stories as well for my career. And that's something I've been working on, and I plan to release it before the games anyway, and then it would be something nice to have if I was to call it a day after that. But since we've had lockdown, I thought I'll push that and make sure it comes out. So yeah, it's quite exciting to have that. So you're more than welcome to anyone who's interested to go and have a read and learn a bit more.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. I would urge everybody, to get in touch with you, Neil, for an initial chat. It costs nothing to have a chat. I hope we will see you back at K Club in the fullness of time, in the distant future, hopefully with another gold medal round your neck. But for the time being, thank you ever so much, and good luck with your preparations.
Yeah, thank you, Dominic. It's been a pleasure.